Amelia Collins had always believed that some kids were simply born unlucky, and she and her twin sister Harper just happened to fall into that category. At 16, they had already lived in more temporary homes than most people did in an entire lifetime. Foster houses with peeling wallpaper, group homes with fluorescent lights that buzzed all night, and donated mattresses that smelled faintly of bleach. Nothing ever felt permanent. Nothing ever felt like theirs. Amelia was the bold one, sharp-witted, quick to speak, carrying a kind of restless determination that came from being disappointed too many times. Harper, on the other hand, was soft-spoken and observant, the kind of girl who noticed small things, a crack in someone's voice, the way a door closed, the tremble in a person's hands. She felt everything deeply, sometimes painfully. They were opposites in many ways, yet inseparable. Two halves of a life that kept trying to split apart. On a gray Tuesday afternoon in early fall, they were called into the office of Mrs. Talbot, the overworked social worker at the group home in Billings, Montana. Amelia assumed they were in trouble again. Harper worried they were being split up. Neither was prepared for what came next. A thick envelope lay on the desk, cream-colored, old-fashioned, and stamped with the seal of a law firm from a tiny town they had never heard of. "You girls," Mrs. Talbot said, adjusting her glasses with a puzzled look, "have been named the sole heirs of a woman named Eleanor Bennett." Harper blinked. "We don't know an Eleanor Bennett." Mrs. Talbot shrugged. "Apparently she knew you. She was your great-aunt, and she left you her property, all of it." Amelia laughed, not out of joy, but disbelief. "Ma'am, we don't even have a permanent mailing address. Why would anyone leave us anything?" "There's also a stipulation," Mrs. Talbot continued. "You must travel to the property within 30 days. If not, it will be sold to cover taxes." Harper clasped her necklace, a nervous habit, while Amelia leaned back, stunned. The world had never handed them anything other than hardship, and now a stranger, someone long gone, had placed a key in their hands. It felt impossible, unreal, but also hopeful. For the first time in a long time, the twins felt something unfamiliar warm in their chests, something tender, cautious, and quietly bright. A beginning. 2 days later, Amelia and Harper found themselves staring out the window of a dusty Greyhound bus as it rattled its way through rural Montana. Golden fields stretched for miles, broken only by barbed wire fences and clusters of weather-beaten barns leaning into the wind. It felt like stepping into another lifetime, quiet, unforgiving, but strangely beautiful in a lonely kind of way. Harper pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching the land roll by like an endless painting. "It's peaceful," she murmured. Amelia raised an eyebrow. "It's empty." "Empty can be peaceful," Harper said gently. The twins stepped off at a small-town station, just a single bench, a crooked street lamp, and a hand-painted sign reading, "Welcome to Willow Creek." The air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke, crisp and clean in a way the city never was. A local driver named Frank, a soft-spoken older man with laugh lines and a cowboy hat bleached by the sun, offered them a ride to the Bennett property. He didn't ask many questions, and the girls appreciated that. The road wound through stretches of open land until Frank finally turned into a gravel driveway, swallowed by tall grass. "There she is," he said quietly. The Bennett farm stood at the end of the path like a memory frozen in time. The two-story farmhouse had once been white, now faded to the color of old newspaper. The porch sagged slightly, its boards creaking in the breeze. An abandoned rocking chair sat facing the fields, waiting for someone who would never return. Harper felt a shiver, part awe, part sadness. "It looks like she left yesterday," she whispered. Amelia tightened her grip on her backpack, feeling an unfamiliar heaviness settle in her chest. "Or like she's been gone for 100 years. Inside, the house was still furnished. A coffee mug sat on the kitchen table, a thin ring of brown dried at the bottom. A knitted throw blanket rested over a chair, and a stack of unopened mail sat by the door. Everything quietly echoing the presence of the woman they never knew. But what drew them most was the view through the back window. An old red barn, its paint chipped and roof uneven, and beside it, the silhouette of a horse standing alone in the fenced paddock. A gray horse, motionless, thin, ancient. "Do you see that?" Harper whispered. Amelia nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do. Something about the horse. Its stillness, Its age, the quiet dignity in the way it held itself, stirred something deep inside them. It felt like the beginning of a secret waiting for them to uncover. The next morning, the twins walked toward the old barn with cautious curiosity. The air was cool, carrying the sharp scent of hay and old timber. Dew clung to the tall grass, brushing their jeans as they made their way across the field. The gray horse stood exactly where he had been the night before, silent, dignified, almost statuesque. Harper stepped closer first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" The horse lifted his head slowly, revealing wise, amber eyes clouded with age, yet strangely alert. Amelia felt her heart tug, a deep, unexpected ache. This wasn't just an old horse abandoned on forgotten land. There was something almost intentional about him being here. They moved past him and into the barn. The moment the heavy doors creaked open, the smell of dust and aged leather filled the air. Sunlight poured through cracks in the wood, forming thin beams that illuminated floating specks like glitter suspended in time. Inside, everything was meticulously organized. Saddles hung neatly, buckets stacked with precision, old feed bags still tied perfectly. It didn't look like chaos or abandonment. It looked like a life paused mid-motion. Harper noticed a locked wooden cabinet in the tack room, its brass handle tarnished with age. "Help me open it?" Amelia nodded and found a loose stone outside. After a few careful strikes, the lock snapped. Inside were folders, dozens of them, packed tightly and labeled with years spanning decades. Vet records, hand-scribbled notes, letters stamped with the logos of genetics labs, and glossy photographs of a younger, powerful gray stallion. Harper's breath caught. "Wait, this can't be real." Amelia opened a thick envelope marked "Confidential." Inside was a lab report confirming something unbelievable. The horse outside, Silver Monarch, was the hidden son of Regal Emperor, one of the most legendary racehorses in American history. A chill ran down Amelia's spine. "This horse, he's worth millions." Harper swallowed hard. "And Aunt Eleanor kept him hidden all these years?" As they sifted through letters, they found dozens from breeding companies, museums, racing syndicates, each more desperate than the last. Offers of 20 million, 30 million, 50 million, all rejected. Then they found the last letter Eleanor received, dated just weeks before her death. A near-pleading request from a genetics lab offering an enormous sum for the horse's breeding rights. Her handwritten note was tucked inside. "He has lived with dignity. I won't let them take that from him." The twins fell silent. Everything, the abandoned farm, the untouched house, the lonely horse, suddenly made sense. Harper's voice trembled. "She was protecting him." Amelia exhaled slowly. "And now, I guess that's our job." Outside, Silver Monarch stood quietly in the sunlight, as if waiting for them to understand. And they finally did. Over the next week, the quiet town of Willow Creek changed in ways the twins never expected. At first, it was just a few phone calls, numbers they didn't recognize, voices too polished, too eager. Then came the emails. Then the men in expensive trucks who drove up the gravel road wearing boots that looked brand new and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Everyone had heard the rumor. Silver Monarch had been found. The lost son of Regal Emperor, the genetic goldmine. Amelia and Harper sat at the kitchen table one evening. Stacks of business cards, printed proposals, and contracts spread out before them like a fan of temptation. The numbers were staggering, offers starting at $20 million and rising fast. One representative, a tall man named Mr. Harlan, arrived with a briefcase in a salesman's confident swagger. He spoke to them like they were adults, like they understood the magnitude of what they were discussing. "We can give Silver Monarch the best veterinary care in the country," he said smoothly. "Climate-controlled stables, round-the-clock treatment, and of course, with his age, we would extract what genetic material we can while he's still viable." Harper's face paled. "Extract? You mean non-invasive procedures," he said quickly. "We want to preserve his bloodline. It's important." Amelia folded her arms. "And how long would he live under all that?" A pause, tight, telling. "Well," Mr. Harlan admitted, "horses his age don't usually have long. That's why time is of the essence. We need to start immediately." Need. The word felt sharp, predatory. After he left, the girls sat in silence. Amelia stared at the window, watching Silver Monarch graze slowly in the fading light. Think about it, Amelia whispered. We could change our entire lives. College, a home, a future. No more sleeping on lumpy mattresses. No more sharing shoes. We'd finally matter. Harper's eyes filled with quiet sorrow. But at what cost? He's a horse, Amelia argued, but her voice cracked. He's not just a horse. Harper shook her head. He's been alone for decades. Aunt Eleanor protected him. She gave up everything for him. Do we really want to be the reason he suffers? Amelia felt a wave of guilt crash through her, a heavy, aching tug in her chest. Silver Monarch wasn't just part of their inheritance. He was their responsibility, their living connection to someone who had cared enough to leave them a chance at a different life. Later that night, Amelia went outside alone. The sky stretched endlessly above her, filled with the cold shimmer of Montana stars. Silver Monarch lifted his head when he sensed her presence. Up close, he seemed even older, but still proud, still gentle, still alive. Amelia pressed her hand to his neck. Warm, steady. We won't let them hurt you, she whispered. For the first time, she meant it with her whole heart. The following month felt like stepping into a different universe, one where Amelia and Harper suddenly mattered to people who wouldn't have given them a second glance before. Lawyers called. Reporters asked for interviews. Breeding syndicates kept sending new proposals, each one with a bigger number typed in bold. The highest offer reached $115 million, but with every new proposal, Harper's anxiety grew deeper, and Amelia's guilt grew heavier. They walked the fields every morning and found Silver Monarch waiting for them, as if he understood that his fate rested in their young hands. He grew more comfortable around the girls, nudging Harper's shoulder gently, lowering his head so Amelia could brush out his tangled mane. He trusted them, and they knew trust was something you couldn't betray, not after everything he had endured. With the help of a local attorney named Daniel Rhodes, they designed a contract the industry had never seen before. Silver Monarch would never leave the Bennett farm. All procedures had to be humane, non-invasive, and supervised by on-site veterinarians. If anything caused distress or pain, the contract would be void. The welfare of the horse came before every dollar. Some companies laughed in their faces. Others argued. One hung up on them. But a major breeding syndicate, Blue Ridge Thoroughbreds, finally agreed. They wanted the bloodline badly enough to accept every restriction. And when the wire transfer hit the account, $114 million neatly deposited, the girls stared at the screen, unable to breathe. They had money, real money, life-changing money, not just for them, but for the life Eleanor had hoped they would one day build. The next morning was cold, the kind of crisp Montana morning that turned every breath to steam. Amelia and Harper stood by the paddock fence while Silver Monarch grazed under the weak sun. Snow dusted the tops of the pines. The mountains glowed faint pink in the early light. Harper leaned forward on the fence rail. Do you think she knew, Aunt Eleanor? Amelia nodded slowly. I think she believed someone would come along who'd choose to protect him. And somehow that turned out to be us. The truth settled between them like a warm blanket, soft, comforting, and a little overwhelming. They spent the next weeks repairing the barn, strengthening the fencing, and renovating the old house. Workers came and went. Supplies arrived in trucks. Tools echoed late into the evenings. The farm slowly shifted from abandoned relic to living home. For the first time in their lives, the girls felt something powerful and grounding. Stability. Harper was accepted into an art program at a local high school. Amelia planned to apply for college. Maybe veterinary science, maybe animal care. They hired a ranch manager, Tom Westfield, a kind, steady man who treated Silver Monarch with the same gentle respect Eleanor had. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, the twins walked out to the paddock with a bag of fresh carrots. Silver Monarch lifted his head, ears twitching, and moved toward them with slow but steady steps. Harper reached out first. Hey, old boy. Amelia stroked his neck. We kept our promise. The wind rustled the grass around them, carrying the quiet, peaceful hum of a world finally righting itself. Harper looked up at the sky, glowing orange and gold. You know, she murmured, he saved us as much as we saved him. Amelia nodded. He gave us a future and a purpose. They stood there together. Two girls the world once forgot, now protectors of a life that meant everything to someone who came before them. Someone who believed in kindness more than wealth, dignity more than profit. someone they now understood deeply. Amelia turned toward the camera, toward you, the listener of their story, and asked, "If you were in our shoes, would you have chosen the money or the life?" And then Harper added softly, "What would you protect, even if the world told you it wasn't worth it?" Their eyes were full of hope, full of meaning, full of a future they never thought they'd live long enough to see. If this story moved you, subscribe now, hit the bell icon, and stay with us for more emotional, life-changing stories that remind us what truly matters. Because sometimes the smallest choices become the biggest legacies.